This is Portless, a CLI tool from Vercel Labs, the same team that brought you Agent Browser, JSON Render, and Skills that replaces localhost port numbers with stable named ones, making it easy for humans and AI agents to always go to the right place and prevent conflicts. But how does this really work under the hood? And will it mess up my system? Hit subscribe and let's get into it. Let's go through how to use Portless with a simple example. So right now I have a project running on port 3001, and if I had this running in the background and completely forgot about it and wanted to run a different project that had a similar port, then I would get this error saying address is already in use. And this is the exact problem that Portless was designed to fix. Because imagine if you had different agents running in different tabs for different projects and they ran into this issue. They could of course fix it, but it would be better if a port was always available for them to run on, so this wouldn't happen in the first place. Now with Portless installed and the Portless proxy running, then I can run the command Portless followed by my host name, which in this case is XDL API, but this can be anything you want. Then the command you want to run, which is bun run dev API. And if I hit enter, it finds a random free port number in the 4000 range, since that's a range that's less likely to be used by other programs, and it exposes my app with my hostname on .localhost 1355. By default, it will be 1355, which stands for less, because it's portless. Get it? Now, if I click here, you can see we have a working app. And if I went to this other app and did the exact same thing, now it's found a different free port and it's using the hostname, but this number at the end will always stay the same. In fact, if we wanted to, we could change it. And if we changed it to port 80, we could just omit this colon and number altogether. So if I start the Portless proxy on port 80, remembering to use sudo, and also using sudo to start the Portless process, then we can just use the subdomain with .localhost. In fact, we could even get HTTPS support on top of using port 80 by using the HTTPS flag, which will allow us to use HTTPS. But if you use feet, you're going to have to set the port variable in the port key, as well as the hosts set to this value. I'll explain why later on in the video. But there are a bunch of other options you get with Portless, like being able to run the proxy in the foreground for debugging, and being able to run a command without the proxy, again for debugging or as an escape hatch. But why does it use a random port number each time, and why does it even need a proxy? Let's get into how it works. So we'll be going through two processes. What happens when the main Portless command is run in a terminal, and what happens when a browser views a Portless URL. So over here, when you run a Portless command, in this case Portless my app, with the command of bun start, what happens is the host and the command are first extracted. Then the next thing it does is check if the proxy is running. And if it's not, it will start it. But there is a caveat, because you can set the port you want the proxy to run on. By default, it's 1355, but if you set it to a value that's below 1024, then it's going to ask for your confirmation before it runs. But if it's above that number, then it will run automatically. Next, it finds a free port between the number 4000 and 4999. And this port is random to make the finding process faster, because if it were sequential, it would have to check all the ports one by one, which could take a long time if you have lots of processes running. Then after it finds a port, it adds the details to a routes.json file. Then it runs your command on that port and adds that port to the port environment variable, which is accessible to most JavaScript applications. Now let's focus on this bit. So when a browser visits a Portless URL, in this case, it will be my app. And if we're sticking to the default port, it will be 1355. Then, of course, it does the whole DNS resolution before creating a TCP connection to the proxy, which just extracts the hostname, so my app, and then uses that to look up the port of your application inside the routes.json file. Then, once it has the correct port number, it forwards the request to your actual app, which sends a response back to the proxy before going to the browser, since the browser expects a response from 1355 and not the number that the proxy randomly assigned at this stage of the process. This also magically works with WebSockets. All of this is very impressive for a weekend project. However, if you use Portless on a non-Next.js project like Vite, then you may run into some issues. First of all, because it uses a random port number assigned to the port variable and not a hard-coded number, you have to make sure your app can run from that port so that the proxy can know where to redirect traffic to. And for Vite or an equivalent bundler, you may have to add this host's key and set it to this value, since it rejects requests from unrecognized origins, and this disables that check. I did try to use the allowed hosts key with different values, but that didn't seem to work. So although this solution does seem extreme, there really is nothing to worry about if you're running things locally. But like most other projects from Vercel Labs, Portless will continue to get updates, meaning most of these features would be ironed out in the future, and so will things like Windows support. Speaking of Vercel Labs, if you haven't yet tried out Agent Browser, the best way for your agents to interact with a browser, you can learn all about it in the next video.